probably, are you leaving? Is there anything going on this afternoon?
No, I don't leave till 3.
You don't leave till
But,
3, okay. I'll be here till 12:15. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. Looks like we may get a little snow this winter. Yeah, not much. So, and welcome to those who are live streaming. Glad to have you as well. So we have Torah Study now for the next several weeks. I don't anticipate a break until maybe later in February, but we'll see. Anyway, we haven't been together for a couple of weeks, so it's good to be back. Why don't we continue with our blessing? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We praise you, Lord our God, sovereign of the universe, who sanctifies us through God's commandments, enabling us to immerse ourselves in words of Torah. Amen. Some thank yous to Sandy for sponsoring the bagels this morning. Thank you very much. To Carol for sponsoring streaming, and Maud for picking up the bagels. I saw you coming in this morning. Carol picked up the bagels. Double credit. Okay, very good. Okay, I'm just reading what I was given, which we can see is a little dangerous. Okay, so this morning we finished the book of Genesis with the last of 12 Torah portions. Genesis has the most Torah portions. I think the figures are 12, 11, 10, 10, 11. 12 for Genesis, 11 for Exodus, 10 for Leviticus, 10 for Numbers, and 11 for Deuteronomy. So the rabbis have divided the book of Genesis into the most Torah portions, which in a way is curious, because as Rashi says in his commentary, right at the beginning of his commentary, why doesn't the Torah begin with Exodus chapter 12, the first laws? The assumption being that the Torah fundamentally, and this is one of the meanings of Torah, is law. That the Torah represents an attempt to form community, and community is built around norms, common laws, common institutions, common kinds of leaders, and so on. So Rashi's question presupposes that the book of Genesis and the first 11 chapters of Exodus seem to be unnecessary. And Rashi does make the point that these chapters, 61 chapters, 50 for Genesis and the first 11 for Exodus, serve as a kind of prologue, the background for God's authority and for the formation of the rudiments of community. Okay? So one of the things we need to look at in the book of Genesis is the book as preparation, we might say, for the full flowering of the community, of the nation, beginning in Exodus. We know there's a gap of 400 or so years between the end of Genesis, which ends with the story of Joseph and his brothers, and the beginning of Exodus, where a Pharaoh rose that did not know Joseph. So we have a major transition, temporal at least, but also substantive, between Genesis and Exodus. A gap of almost a millennium in terms of time, but in terms of substance, we move from the story of families to the story of a people, a community, a nation. So we want to see, as we look at Genesis, what problems there might have been which threaten community, which need to be solved before the community can be healthy and whole. Are they solved or are they not? So I want to suggest this morning that one of the major questions of the book of Genesis, and we've talked about this before, but I want to do it in a little more systematic way, is the problem of sibling rivalry within families. And I want to suggest that the book of Genesis presupposes a profound analogy between family and community, family and nation, with the idea that as the family goes, so goes the nation. And Maimonides makes this point in the third section of the Guide for the Perplexed, that the family is the first part of the nation. And we learn how to be a citizen within the family. And the book of Genesis is a book about families, right? Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel, Noah and his sons, Abraham and Sarah and their children, Isaac and Ishmael and their family, their children, Jacob and Esau and their family, Jacob's sons, the 12 brothers and their families. It's a story of families. And therefore, it's a story of the relationship between members of the family and one another, okay? And the primary relationship that we want to look at, that the book of Genesis looks at, is siblings, okay? Cain and Abel, I just made a list here. Cain and Abel, rivalry. Noah's sons, rivalry, right? How do they approach their drunken father with their differences and leads to cursing? Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau. You remember in chapter 38, the so-called digression, which I don't think it really is, Judah and Tamar. And Tamar finally gives birth to twins, Peretz and Zerah, who are struggling for primacy in the order of birth. There's Leah and Rachel, who have a rivalry of their own. There's Joseph and his brothers. So the story of Genesis, the major elements are about families and primarily the rivalries within a family, and especially the rivalry among siblings, okay? If we looked at Genesis chapter 12, we could see another way in which this is expressed. This is the call of Abraham. This is what Abraham is all about, what his vocation is going to be. And of course, Abraham is the progenitor of the Israelites, and therefore Abraham is the first in two ways, which we've talked about on several occasions. The first in time and the first in presuppositions. What Abraham is about lays the groundwork for what his descendants are about. Okay? The Lord said to Avram, "Go forth from your native land, from your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. And I will bless those who bless you and curse him that curses you. And all the families of the earth earth shall bless themselves by you. Okay? Family and nation. Avram went forth as the Lord had commanded. Lot went with him. He brings a family member. He was 75 when he left Haran. He took his wife Sarah, his brother's son Lot, and all the wealth he had amassed. Abraham is to bless the families of the earth, make himself a great nation. And when he says yes to God's call, he takes family members with him. Okay? So the threads that run through the book of Genesis, the prologue, just to bring Rashi's view back in, to the book of Exodus and what follows, is tied together by family relationships and fundamentally family rivalries. Okay, so as I just said a minute ago, as the family goes, so goes the nation. If the family cannot heal its inherent wounds, vulnerabilities, then the nation doesn't have a chance. That's what I think the book of Genesis can be thought of in one of its forms. There are a lot of things going on in Genesis. I wouldn't want to say this is the only theme. But the question is, can the families heal the problems of sibling rivalry and sibling relationship? If they can't, siblings don't have a chance at all. Therefore, the problem of sibling rivalry better be solved by the end of the book of Genesis. And my hypothesis is it is solved. It's solved by Joseph and his brothers. And when we look at the solution of the story of Joseph and his brothers, climactically in the Torah portion for this week, we have to look at it in two ways. What are the dynamics among the various individuals as they deal with their rivalry? And what are the principles, the values through which they are able to solve this problem? In other words, it's not just a matter of this family, Joseph and his brothers, coming to grips with their own rivalry. If this has a more programmatic element, it's trying to lay the foundations for a healthy community, then we better see not only the way in which this set of brothers solves its problem, but the methods by which they solve their problem, which can then be the foundation for the ways in which a community solves its own internal rivalries. In other words, it seems to me the story of Joseph and his brothers is both about this one family, but it's also about the ways in which families, citizens, communities can solve their problems. Or to put it differently, you're probably going to think I'm reaching a little too far here, but I'm going to do it anyway. The story of Joseph and his brothers is both a novel and an ethical treatise. It's both telling us about the interactions among individuals, facing one another, facing their environment, trying to figure out how to solve their problems. That's what novels do, right? Dilemmas, complexities, and how can we arrive, according to classical novels, at some resolution at the end. But it's also working with ethical principles. How is it that these particular individuals resolve their problems? Okay. So we might divide Genesis into 4 or 5 parts. The prehistory, Genesis 1 through 11, the story of Abraham and Sarah, 12 through 24, The story of Isaac, essentially chapter 25 all by himself. Isaac figures in the story of his father and the story of his children, but he doesn't figure in his own story except in chapter 25. When you think about the three parts of Isaac's role in Abraham's family, on his own, and in his children's family, Isaac is featured in the first and the third of those, lying down. He's lying down for the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. He's lying down when he is, at least as he says, near death when his sons come into him to give him game. It's only in chapter 25 that he's on his own. So we have the primary story. We have the story of Abraham and his family, 12 through 24. We have Isaac in 25. We have Jacob beginning in chapter 36. And Jacob really plays a role, sometimes in the background, for the last quarter, more than the last quarter of the book of Genesis, but primarily beginning with the birth of the sons in chapter 37. So what I want to do is look at several passages in the story of Joseph and his brothers and see if we can figure out how the problem arises and how it may be resolved. Okay? So let's turn to chapter 37. This is a familiar story, of course, but now what I want to look at and make explicit is, how did things go wrong in this family? That's basically what chapter 37 is about. So let me read it, and then let's talk about how things went wrong. Now Jacob was settled in the land where his father had sojourned, in the land of Canaan. This then is the line of Jacob. At 17 years of age, Joseph tended the flocks with his brothers as a helper to the sons of his father's wives Bilhah and Zilpah. And Joseph brought bad reports of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph best of all his sons, for he was the child of his old age, and he had made him an ornamented tunic. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of his brothers, they hated him, so that they could not speak a friendly word to him. Why don't we stop right here and talk a little bit about it? What are the causes of this rivalry? Jim?
Well, there's several. It tells you right in the sentence at 17 years of age, he was sent to help his half-brothers. They had different mothers.
Right?
Well, each mother would normally favor their own child over a stepchild.
Okay.
So right then and there, you have some tension
Among brothers.
among the brothers and the mothers who are all in one family that you're saying is the basis of civilization, which is true, but you already have this tension there.
Right.
So that's starting, and then the father blatantly favors the one child.
Yes, and why?
Because he favored that wife.
Okay, that's not explicitly stated, but it might be implied that Rachel was his favorite wife, and therefore the offspring of that wife are going to be favored in the family. So the contingencies of family relationships is one thing. What else? What's another cause of his favoritism?
His age, time. This is the child of his old age.
Child of his old age. So what does that mean?
It means he's, first of all, thinking of his mortality.
Okay.
It means that he is a tempered father at this point.
Tempered in what sense?
In that he has all these other sons and daughters, but he is, as age creates a different kind of state of mind.
Okay.
He favors, he is looking inward and
Okay?
his legacy.
Okay.
I mean, I'm decorating this with a lot of words, but, yeah, I mean,
So age, perhaps he's softened a little bit as you suggest, as he looks to his own mortality. Don't you also think that birth order is a factor here? He is his youngest son, or second young. Not only is he the son of the favored wife, along with Benjamin, who will be endangered in the same way later that Joseph is at the beginning. But birth order seems to have some role in family, so that the relationship among the parents, the birth order, the issue of favoritism, are these rare in families? These are problems in families and create inevitable tensions among not only all of the members of the family, but especially, as here, among the children, who have to carry the burden of the realities of the family connections. He also makes Joseph an ornamented tunic, so that he's represented as favoring Joseph in yet another way. In other words, parental favoritism also plays a role. And we can well imagine, I mean, all of us who are in families, and that's all of us, depending on the predilections of the parent and the way in which those predilections, those interests are expressed in their children in different ways. If one of the parents is an artist, and one of the children shows an interest in art right away, this is likely to create a kind of bond between that parent and that child, even if the parent is alert to the problems that this raises for the others. Okay? So that I think what the Torah is, in a way, surgically displaying here are the kinds of problems that are likely to create these difficulties. It's hard to imagine a family, especially with several children, that doesn't have these problems, because we're all human beings. I took my two daughters out to play tennis. They weren't interested. My son was interested. We spent more time together in that regard. I mean, I hope I wasn't neglectful of my girls. I'm sure I was not. But there was a kind of energy between my son and me because we shared a passion. And this undoubtedly had some kind of an impact on my daughters, right? So a good parent tries to even things out, so to speak. This is not a mathematical or a calculative kind of issue. But you can see how, children are bound to have different interests. Some converge with the parents, some do not. One parent and not the other. And here we see some of these features. Let's go on. Verse 5. Once Joseph had a dream which he told to his brothers, and they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were binding sheaves in the field, when suddenly my sheaf stood up and remained upright, and then your sheaves gathered around and bowed low to my sheaf." Let's try to picture ourselves as Joseph's brothers being present at this episode. Let's go on. Verse 8. His brothers answered, "Do you mean to reign over us? Do you mean to rule over us?" And they hated him even more for his talk and for his dreams. He dreamed another dream, told it to his brothers. "Look, I have another dream. And this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bowing down to me." And when he told it to his father and brothers, his father berated him. What, he said to him, is this dream you have dreamed? Are we to come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow low to you to the ground? So his brothers were wrought up at him. Vayikan uvo. They were jealous of him. They were in a rage over him. And his father kept the matter in mind. Okay, what do we have here? How would we describe Joseph here?
An egotistical madman.
I'm sorry?
An egotistical madman.
An egotistical madman, you want to say. Okay, self-absorbed. Michael?
Prodigal son.
I'm sorry?
Prodigal son.
The prodigal son, in what sense?
Showing promise.
He's what?
I would say showing promise.
Okay, showing promise. Okay, all right. So that's an interesting point here. You're saying that Joseph has a special kind of an endowment. He has these dreams. He has the capacity to articulate them and to indicate what they mean. So Joseph has the potential of being a Torah commentator. Okay, but this may endear him even more to his father, but also maybe to the author. Okay, so Joseph is blind to how this is going to be heard by his brothers. He doesn't try to soften it. He just gives it to them. So he's egotistical. In what sense do you think he's a madman? Or is that just hyperbole?
Well, from the perspective of the rest of his family, how can someone in a dream imagine they have this authority,
Okay,
this greater power
okay.
than the rest of the family?
Okay, very good. So he's thinking of himself as first among equals, as special. And he's telling it to his brothers. Vivian?
I'm going back to the novel mode here.
Good.
Back to the tunic. Joseph is branded as gifted. He is colorful in walking around on this earth. And in addition, because of his insight and foresight and dreams, he is, we see his future, or at least we are led to believe that he is going to be exceptional, and he is destined for greatness.
Very good. So Joseph is endowed with
Yes.
rare, significant capacities, talents, virtues. Good. What about the brothers? Cindy?
This is a question. Is there any significance to the fact that when the brothers or father asks, is this what you think the dream means, he does not answer?
Okay. All right. Yeah. By the way, what's the answer to the question? Are they going to bow down to him? Yes. So Joseph also has, I don't know what to call it, the capacity for reaching into the future. That's probably a little too much to say. But it turns out, after all, both for this story, as for Sigmund Freud, dreams have significance. Dreams are messages, right? That's what Freud is saying. What Freud does is he reverses the origin. Dreams generally in traditional religions come from above. For Freud, dreams come from below, from our unconscious. But for both, they are messages. And here, when we see the unfolding of this story, we can see that Joseph's dreams come true, that the brothers and the father do bow down to him. The question is going to be, what's the significance of that bowing down? And I want to suggest to you that Joseph comes to see the meaning of these dreams at the end of the story in a way he didn't at the beginning. There's a transformation of the meaning of the dream, which reflects a transformation in Joseph, right? So this is also a novelistic idea, right? The development of character and the dilemmas that character has to face in a story. Jordan?
Joseph's character, he's young, he's a tattletale, he's a brat, as somebody said, Miss Joseph is. And he knows that eventually that the dreams come from God,
Yeah.
including God's work and hand in his brothers sending him into slavery.
Right.
We have prophets who get the word of God, are vilified, and have trouble with conveying that word from Jonah on to everyone else.
Yeah.
When you tell bad news, you're not welcome.
Right. So you're making an analogy between Joseph and the prophets. Yeah.
His personality didn't let him handle it as well as the prophets.
That's an interesting point, actually. Joseph is vilified. Prophets, certainly prophets of chastisement, are vilified. Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and so on. So, God, there was something else that you said there that I wanted to say something about. Well, it may come back to me. What, so the dreams get him in trouble. Right. Okay, so what about the brothers? What can we say about them in this episode? Maya?
I just wanted to relate to what you previously said. So the Hebrew is
Where are you?
on 8.
Okay.
End of 8.
Okay.
It says, and they hated him for his dreams and for his words.
Yes.
And I think that the point is, you are entitled to have your dreams. Do you have to care about them?
Yes.
And I think that's the hubris. That he had the thing, but keep your mouth shut. Why do you have to aggravate everybody?
Very, very good. Good. That's a nice insight. So the Torah here describes two elements here. The nature of the dreams, but why did he have to go and brag about them? And you point out hubris, regarding oneself on a higher level than might be real.
And then if we go with the hubris idea, then you expect, okay, he's going to be punished.
Okay, very good. So that's good. So the brothers punish him. And what about the brothers? What do we know about the brothers?
Without the parental favoritism, the brothers would have listened to this and just laughed him off. He was just a kid. This trajectory was set up from the beginning.
Okay. So it's rubbing salt in a wound. They're already wounded, and therefore they understand the dreams in a heightened way, because they're living with this, I might say, problematic family circle.
And it's become a reality based on how their father has been treating Joseph.
Right.
Their lives.
Also, Kathy?
Where do we assume the dream comes from? Does God give the dream? And if God gives the dream, then is not God the provocateur of the rivalry? Because why give the dream to a 17-year-old rather than later when more mature and prepared for it? So isn't God provoking this rivalry?
Okay. So every now and then I recall that I've got to repeat the questions for people live streaming, about one every 10 events. So Kathy is asking if dreams come from God, and we don't know that explicitly here, but we come to know it pretty soon when Joseph says to the Pharaoh, dreams come from God, okay? And that means you're suggesting that God is the provocateur, which is an intriguing idea, really, because is God a troublemaker here in that sense of provocateur? Or does God have an insight into Joseph's endowment and his capacity to deal with the situation, his capacity for growth, because Joseph is the right person to be chosen here, doesn't he? Joseph, as this story unfolds and reaches its climax, plays a vital role in the healing of the family circle. So, yes, provocateur, but does God know something about Joseph? God needs to get the story, just to continue with your assertion here, to get the story underway. Do you remember Joseph says at the end, you meant it for evil, God meant this whole story for good. So the story itself suggests, we have to ask ourselves when we get there, what does Joseph mean by saying this? But assuming that it's true, God has a plan and is choosing a person who can pull it off.
So just to go a little bit further, the father, by making the cloak, is also a provocateur.
Absolutely.
So the elders, the sacred, and within the family, provoking the children seems to be a bit of a line through many of these stories.
Yeah, absolutely.
That they can step in as the more mature and be the peacemakers. And so how does this build into community and build into a peaceful living when the authority figures keep provoking the innocents to certain behaviors?
Welcome to reality. I mean, this is not only the case in most of these family problems, it is an element in all of our families' pathologies, small p. Some families have more problems than others, but I think one of the things we can infer from this story is that the very structure of the family makes the family vulnerable to these kinds of issues. So the question is not, why does the Torah present us with a unique family situation? The question really is, given that the Torah recognizes the nature of human beings in their relationship with one another, all the more so in the intimacy of the family circle, and given that these realities can often create centrifugal movements, the family flying apart, how do we deal with it? In other words, it strikes me that one of the ways of looking at this is a representative situation, and the Torah is trying to find ways to overcome the pathology so that the family, so that the nation, the family writ large, can thrive. That's my hypothesis. I want to go on a little bit. What else can we say about the brothers? Let me just make a suggestion here. Strong emotions. This little story is filled with heightened emotion, favoritism, special love, hatred. Not only hatred, but the verse that Maya points out, V'yosifu od snow oto al chalamot v'al devaro. They hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. So that not only do we have asymmetrical situations, not all of the sons are treated equally, and the sons don't treat themselves equally, but we also have the emotions that these pathologies create in a very heightened way. I mean, this is a cauldron of problems. And I like to think that the author and the author's brilliance is not only telling us a memorable story, but unpacking why this and many other stories like it go awry, which leaves us with the question of how is it going to be resolved. So let's go on just a little bit. Verse 12. One time when his brothers had gone to pasture their father's flock at Shechem, Israel said to Joseph, you remember Jacob's other name is Israel, Your brothers are pasturing at Shechem. Come, I'll send you to them. He answered, I'm ready. Okay? Well, this is another perhaps more minor problem. Why does Jacob exacerbate the situation by sending Joseph, who is already in tension with his brothers, off by himself to find them? In a way, maybe without knowing it or intending it, he's setting Joseph up. And he said to him, go see how your brothers are and how the flocks are faring, and bring me back word. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. When he reached Shechem, a man came upon him wandering in the fields. The man asked him, what are you looking for? He answered, I'm looking for my brothers. Could you tell me where they are pasturing? The man said, they have gone from here, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph followed his brothers and followed them at Dothan. Twilight Zone moment. How come the one person they're represented as Joseph's represented coming across knows where the brothers are? What are the chances? So this raises the question of God's hand in the story, doesn't it? This is either an accident or it's part of a larger framework of the story. So God is entering the picture here. Now, look, on the one hand, we could say that this story is the product of a dual causation. Human activity and motivation, divine activity. Why does this author, who's an extremely gifted storyteller, bringing God into the story? Now, what do I mean by this? The author is gifted enough not to need God in the story. It can work very well without God. The brothers solve their own problems at the end. So the question is the author so committed to a theology that he has to insert it at every point in his narrative? In other words, there's something contingent about this. You don't need God in this story to make it work. So why is God here? Well, one answer is the author's a theologian. You know? I mean, why does the first baseman wear a first baseman's glove? That's how the game is played. You got to wear a glove. You're going to tell a story in the Bible, you're going to bring God in. And, could be both, that and the solution to the problem of sibling rivalry, and therefore the family and therefore the community, must bring God into the picture. The elements of the solution may, according to this author, need God as part of the solution. Or to put it differently, perhaps won't need God as an actor, but as the object of belief. Maybe the author is suggesting that among the ways in which these problems can be resolved, belief in a higher power is an important component. If I'm right about this, not only is God a provocateur, God is a necessary element in the solution of the family's problem. Now, we might want to doubt this, but I offer this as a kind of hypothesis, and let's see how that works. Let's go on a little bit. So I'd like to turn now to chapter 42. We know what happens to Joseph. I mean, the brothers want to kill him. Reuben says, don't kill him, because Reuben wanted to return him to his father. They throw him in a pit. They take the opportunity of selling him to Midianite or Ishmaelite traders. He gets down to Egypt, and given his innate, inherent endowment, he succeeds, even though he's a single individual in a foreign land. And he rises very high in Potiphar's house. Potiphar's wife takes a liking to him and tries to seduce him. He runs away out of his coat, I think is how it's described. And she says he tried to rape me and he's put in jail. When he's in jail, he doesn't languish. He's with the butler and the baker. They've been put in jail because they've wronged Pharaoh. They have dreams. So now we're confronted with two pairs of dreams. Joseph's initial dreams, which start the story off, the pair of dreams of the two people in jail, which have the role of getting Joseph out of jail because he interprets those dreams correctly. And when they're out of jail and they go back, one of them is killed. You remember there's a use of a pun here where the butler, Pharaoh, is going to lift up your head and return you to your office. And for the baker, Pharaoh is going to lift off your head and kill you. So the butler, I think it's the butler, returns to Pharaoh. Pharaoh has these dreams, another pair of dreams. So this is the third set of dreams. And he can't find anybody to interpret them to his satisfaction. And the butler says, oh, by the way, I remember that I had this guy in prison with me, Joseph. He interpreted our dreams. Bring him out to interpret these dreams. So they bring Joseph out. Pharaoh says, I understand you're a master of dreams. And Joseph says, the interpretation of dreams is not mine, it's God's. And God will give me the interpretation of the dream. God enters the picture as, again, not just or not as an actor who has something to do with how the story moves along, but as an object of action, that is the object of belief. So we have two ways in which God enters this story. As one who moves the story along, and as one who is referred to as a special authority. Gary?
I'm not positive that this is really God's story. You can call God a provocateur, but this is his story, him putting himself in the center of the story. For example, God selects Joseph as a leader. God also does that with Jeremiah. He does that with David. So God selects young people, or in some cases, one in the womb, I guess, as people who are going to have a presence in the entire story. So I think that this is really God's story.
Okay.
The second thing that strikes me here is the fact that none of the brothers attempt to protect Joseph at all.
None of the brothers.
I thought that Reuben or Judah might have reached out to protect this young fellow. But we don't see that at all.
Yeah, okay.
It sounds like a gang.
So maybe that has to do with the family structure, that Joseph, among all the children, is favored by the father, and the only one alive who's born of the favored wife. And therefore, the whole family structure really can be outlined as 1 against 11. Or maybe it's 10, because Benjamin's around at this point, yeah, but he's not mentioned yet. In terms of your point about it's God's story, here's how I think we ought to think about it. If you take God out of the story, does the story work? I think the answer is yes. So that God is not a necessary condition for the trajectory of the story. This is a secular novel, we might say. What scholars say about the Joseph story is that it was influenced by Egyptian wisdom communities. And wisdom, the book of Proverbs, how to make it through my day, the book of Ecclesiastes, how am I going to deal with the imponderables of my life? These are products of wisdom where God plays a marginal role, if at all. And one could say that this story works without God. Well, Joseph is going to say, yeah, wait a minute now, God is a part of this story. But I'm going to suggest not that that is not part of the story that God is playing a role. We already see it here in this guy from Dotan. But that more than that, bringing God into the story as an object of faith is part of the solution to the brothers' dilemma. This is a case for believing in God, not necessarily for God's active role in moving the story along, although that's one of the things that Joseph says. So let's look at chapter 42, verse 7. So Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams, rises high to power. The Torah says that Joseph is 30 years old when he enters Pharaoh's household. Remember, at the very beginning, he's 17 years old. So now Joseph, assuming that the events of chapter 37 happen quickly, in 1 year, within the scope of 1 year, that 13 years have passed now between when Joseph was sent away and when he rises to the Pharaoh. We'll have to think about the years just a little bit. So now Joseph predicts to the Pharaoh that there are going to be 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of famine, so that he says you ought to find somebody who knows something about how to work situations so that that person can plan for the years of famine during the years of plenty. And Pharaoh says, my gosh, who could I pick? Pick me, Joseph says. I'm exaggerating a little bit. But he sees that Joseph is endowed with wisdom. And so Joseph becomes second in command and creates an economic policy of storing grain during the 7 years for the 7 years of famine. And those 7 years are now past, and we're into the second year of the famine. So how long has it been at this moment since Joseph was taken away? 22 years. 13 plus 7 plus 2. Okay? He's been away for 2 decades. Now the brothers have come to him as the one in charge of economic policy to get grain. Verse 6 of chapter 42. Now Joseph was the vizier of the land. It was he who dispensed rations to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed low to him. That's what the dreams suggested. So that here, the structure is one in charge and those who are appealing for something, the needy. So that follows the structure of his dreams. You will bow down to me in the sense that I'm superior to you. And here is what it happens. So the dreams come true at this moment in a certain sense. Hey, Joseph has a special access to the divine truth, the way things are. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed low to him with their faces to the ground. When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he acted like a stranger toward them and spoke harshly to them. He asked them, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to procure food." For though Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Recalling the dreams that he had dreamed about them, Joseph said to them, "You are spies." Now, why does the author have to add the beginning of that verse? Recalling the dreams that he dreamed about them, Joseph said to them, why couldn't it go like this? Now we're starting with verse 8. For though Joseph recognized his brothers, they didn't recognize him. He said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see the land in its nakedness." He doesn't have to remember to recall the dreams in order for the story to proceed. What's the function, the authorial function of having him at this moment recall his dreams? But they said to him, "No, my lord, truly your servants have come to procure food. We are all of us the sons of the same man. We're honest men. Your servants are never despised." And he said to them, "No, You have come to see the land in its nakedness. What do we make of Joseph's reaction here? He's recalling the dreams. He's recalling that primal moment of outrage. In a word, okay, here's my speculation. He's holding on to his anger and his resentment toward his brothers. And when provoked, since that resentment and that anger are right on the surface of his mind, he can invoke them immediately. In other words, one of the issues of the healing of relationships is holding on to the past, especially the negative components of the past. Okay? I'm going to quote Martin Luther King. Resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping that it will kill your enemies. Okay? So, to who does resentment poison? Certainly those for whom you feel resentment, but also, this is what Martin Luther King is suggesting, the one who holds on to the resentment. How can a relationship be healed if the past continues to live in all of its emotional intensity on into the future? If you can't give up, not the facticity of the past, but its emotional valence, the scars that it has led to, if you can't give those up, relationships are imperiled on into the future. And here it seems to me that the author is telling us that one of the problems in this whole nexus of relationships is holding on to the past, and especially the resentments. Here's a rhetorical question. Who of us who are in families doesn't feel some resentment toward one's siblings or one's parents? Who is totally free of that? Who has grown up in a family and has no reason to feel some residual anger or a sense of being pushed aside a little bit, maybe in favor of somebody else? Maybe the parents were tired and they didn't have time for it. Go to your room, I don't want to see you until the morning. And a person holds on to that. And that is the poison, it seems to me, that we see here. And in suggesting that this little mini narrative works without Joseph recalling his dreams, that the author intends for us to see that he is assessing the present moment in the context of the past. One of the problems that needs to be resolved, getting rid of the inevitable resentments and angers that we feel. Patty, then I want to move on to chapter 44.
I just have a quick, alternate proposal,
What? Yeah.
for their recollections of dreams.
Yes.
The second dream that he had, not the three chiefs, but the moon and the sun, 11 stars. So by this time, he's been away for a long time, he's been interpreting his own dreams and those of others, and realizes that they actually come true to a large extent.
Okay.
I'm assuming. So to me, the way that he's accused them of being spies is a contrived way of bringing Benjamin to him as well, so that second dream includes the 11 brothers.
Yes.
So that instead of having resentment coming from the recollection of the dreams, he remembered the dream, remembers the 11 stars, and so that's why he's trying to get Benjamin to the
So Patty's view is the recollection of the dreams, which I've taken to be not an essential element of the story, and therefore something worth thinking about. Patty's view is that the recollection of the dreams is all about trying to find a way to get Benjamin down to him, because the second dream especially included Benjamin. Right. One could also say that Joseph has experienced the success of his dreams, and so he brings them back here in order to anticipate more success of the dreams. It doesn't have to be as problematic. And that's your point, isn't it? The invoking of the dreams here doesn't have to be a problem as I've made it out to be. Okay, several interpretations of this particular moment. I like that. But after Torah study is over this morning, when I go back to my office, I'm going to say, but my interpretation. Okay. Very good. Okay, so let's go now to chapter 44, the climax of the story, because Joseph sends the brothers back and says, if you're going to come back again, you have to bring Benjamin with you. Okay? So, chapter 44. So so the brothers have come back, Benjamin has been with them, and now he's going to send them back with grain. Then he instructed his house steward as follows: fill the men's bag with food, as much as they can carry. Put each one's money in the mouth of his bag. Put my silver goblet in the mouth of the bag of the youngest one, together with his money for the rations. And he did as Joseph told him. With the first light of morning, the men were sent off with their pack animals. They had just left the city, had not gone far, when Joseph said to his steward, up, go after the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, why did you repay good with evil? It is the very one from which my master drinks and which he uses for divination. It was a wicked thing for you to do. He overtook them, spoke these words to them. They said to him, why does my Lord say such things? Far be it from your servants to do anything of the kind. Here we brought back to you from the land of Canaan the money that we found in the mouths of our bags at the first return. How then could we have stolen any silver or gold from your master's house? Whichever of your servants it is found with shall die. The rest of us, moreover, shall become slaves to my Lord. He replied, although what you are proposing is right, only the one with whom it is found shall be my slave, but the rest of you shall go free. You see a master storyteller at work here. He is contriving again the initial conditions of this whole story. That one son, and it's not accidental that it's Benjamin, is now singled out, another child of Jacob's old age, another child of Rachel, the favored wife. And the brothers have the option now of sacrificing Benjamin while they can go free. Just as at the beginning, they sacrificed Joseph, not literally, you know what I mean by sacrifice, they gave him up. And they felt that they were now free. So what the storyteller has been able to contrive are the initial conditions of the primal crime, to see whether or not, we might say, the brothers have changed their approach. Are they going to do to Benjamin what they did to Joseph? Or has there been change in their character, we might say? In Maimonides' Mishnah Torah, he makes a distinction between teshuvah and teshuvah shlema, forgiveness, confession, or perfect confession, contrition. It's contrition. Perfect contrition means you're sorry and won't do it again. Perfect contrition is when you have the opportunity to do it again and you don't do it, right? And then Maimonides quotes a passage from somewhere, quoting Solomon, who said, make haste with contrition while you still have time. There are some sins that as we grow older, it's less likely that we're able to engage in them. So if you're not going to do those sins, you better have the opportunity not to do it soon. Here, the author has set up the possibility of perfect contrition because they have the same opportunity again with the individual and the same structural family relationship with them. Verse 11, so each one hastened to lower his bag to the ground. Each one opened his bag. He searched, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest. And the goblet turned up in Benjamin's bag. At this they rent their clothes. Each reloaded his pack animal, and they returned to the city. When Judah and his brothers re-entered the house of Jacob, who was still there, they threw themselves on the ground before him. They bowed down to him. Joseph said to them, "What is this deed that you have done? Do you not know that a man like me practices divination?" Judah replied, "What can we say to my Lord? How can we plead? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered the crime of your servants." That's some evidence for Gary's position, that in some important way, this is God's story as well. Here we are then, slaves of my Lord, the rest of us as much as he in whose possession the goblet was found. But he, Joseph replied, "Far be it from me to act thus. Only he in whose possession the goblet was found shall be my slave. The rest of you can go back in peace to your father." It's an extraordinary novelized moment, isn't it? I mean, imagine this on the screen where we now see this conversation between Joseph and his brothers, and he says to them, "You can go." How does the producer picture them at this particular moment? Hey, we're free. Then Judah went up to him and said, so Judah now, and we might say representing the brothers, goes down a different path. They have the opportunity to act in just the way they did before, and he chooses not to go down that path. And so what I'd like us to think about is, what are the elements of this difference in decision? So this is Judah's attempt to solve the problem of sibling rivalry. They could continue the story and leave Benjamin back, and Jacob is going to be very upset, and of course they've had their comeuppance and so on. So let's think of this as the beginning of the process of some reconciliation. Then Judah went up to him and said, "Please, my Lord, let your servant appeal to my Lord. And do not be impatient with your servant, you who are the equal of Pharaoh. My Lord asked his servants, 'Have you a father or another brother?' And we told my Lord, 'We have an old father. And there is a child of his old age, the youngest. His full brother is dead, so that he alone is left of his mother. And his father dotes on him.'" What do we have so far? I'm sorry, Cindy? Repetition of the story. And so, what does Judah change the mood of that story? Does Jacob react here the way he did at the beginning of the story? My Lord asked his servants, "Have you a," verse 19, "We told my Lord, we have a father." No, we have an old father. So the element of pathos, I don't want to overstate it, but is entered. I want to presuppose that Judah knows exactly what he's doing. Now, one might not want to accept that premise, but I want to suggest that adding the word old adds an element of pathos which is deliberate. And there is a child of his old age. That was a reason, one of the reasons for the favoritism. Now Judah is acknowledging the salience, the importance of that element. The youngest, his full brother is dead, so that he alone is left of his mother. Hey, we're left of our mother too. But now I'm going to single out Benjamin in this pathos-filled moment. It's he. He's the one who is left alone of his mother. And his father dotes on him. There's no resentment in this description at all. It's as if Judah accepts the reality of parental favoritism. He's going to let the anger of that situation go. Then you said to your servants, bring him down to me, that I may set eyes on him. And we said to my Lord, the boy cannot leave his father. If he were to leave him, his father would die. They had no interest in that line of reasoning at the beginning. They separated him from his father. They sent him down to Egypt. And you remember what they did. They killed an animal. They took the skin of the animal. They dipped it in blood. They took it to Jacob and they said, this is what happened to Joseph. He was eaten by an animal. And Jacob mourned. But they provoked the anguish in the father. Now they're deeply worried about replicating that anguish. They have a new regard, I want to suggest, for the father. But verse 23, you said to your servants, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, do not let me see your faces. When we came back to your servant, my father, we reported my Lord's word to him. And later our father said, go back and procure some food for us. And we answered, we can't go down. Only if our youngest brother is with us can we go down. For we may not show our faces to the man unless our youngest brother is with us. Your servant, my father, said to us, as you know, my wife bore me 2 sons. Right? So there seems to be some acceptance of the problems of the family. I mean, Judah could have said, one of the wives bore to him 2 sons. My wife bore me 2 sons. That's Jacob's view. He's representing Jacob's view. There is a favored wife. So it's plausible to say, my wife bore me 2 sons. It's one thing for Jacob to feel that. It's another thing for the brothers who are disfavored by that reality to accept that reality. Here I'm going to go for something big. They recognize, I think it's big, they recognize that a parent is flawed, that a parent is going to engage in some of these acts of favoritism, to take the boy out for tennis and not the girls. And the question is, if the girls harbor resentment and anger about this altogether natural fact, then the family to that degree is less healthy. But if the girls can say, well, look, I mean, dad loves tennis, the son loves tennis, he's taking them out for tennis. I sure hope he does some things for us, but we're not going to hold any resentment about that. Being able to let go of the jealousy and the resentment that may ensue is part of the solution, isn't it? Verse 27, your servant, my father, said to us, as you know, my wife bore me 2 sons, but one is gone from me. And I said, alas, he was torn by a beast, and I've not seen him since. If you take this one from me too, he meets with disaster, you'll send down my white head down to Sheol in sorrow. Now if I come to your servant, my father, and the boy is not with us, since his own life is so bound up with his, and the Hebrew is especially elegant, v'nafsho kashu rav v'nafsho, his soul, his person, Kshura, is knitted together with his soul, soul and soul. For which Judah seems to be perfectly comfortable with. This is the way it is. When he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die. And your servants will send the white head of your servant, our father, down to Sheol in grief. Now your servant has pledged himself for the boy to my father, saying, if I don't bring him back to you, I shall stand guilty before my father forever. So he's willing, recognizing, what kind of a solution is this? Benjamin's got to go back, or Judah will die. So Judah is willing to put himself in place of Benjamin and become imprisoned forever. But Judah is also a son of the same father. So he recognizes in some way that Benjamin means more to Jacob than Judah does. And why? He's the son of his old age. He's the son of the favored wife. These happen to be the realities of the family dynamic. These are something like them. And how's a family going to get past these? And Judah is trying to get past them by taking them as an inevitable part of the family dynamic. That's what I think here. Verse 32. Now your servant has pledged himself for the boy to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, I shall stand guilty before my father forever. Therefore, please let your servant remain as a slave to my Lord instead of the boy, and let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father unless the boy is with me? Let me not be witness to the woe that would overtake my father. Several chapters before, they were glad to witness the woe of the father in order to get themselves off scot-free. So there has been a transformation of the character, the expectations, the aspects of at least Judah, who we might say is speaking for the brothers, who in some sense agree. Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, have everyone withdraw from me. So there was no one else about when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. So let's suppose that I was in a situation like this, and now I want to make myself known to my brothers. Who am I? Well, I'm Roger Klein. I live on Cedar Road. My birthday is X. The picture is not at all like me. Is this what Joseph does? He makes himself known in terms of the external aspects of his life. I am Joseph. Is my father well? But his brothers could not answer him. So dumbfounded were they on account of him. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come forward to me. And when they came forward, he said, for the second time, he also said this in verse 2, verse 1, when Joseph made himself so on and so on, his brothers and so on. Oh, in verse 3, I am Joseph. Look what he says here, verse 4 again. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come forward to me. And when they came forward, he said, I am, no, he doesn't say I am Joseph. I am your brother Joseph. This is not just a biographical fact, I want to suggest. Joseph is emotionally returning to the family circle. Who am I? I'm a brother. He didn't have to say that. He was estranged from his brother. He was resentful of his brothers. I am not their brother. Oh, if you want to ask for the facts, yes, I am. That's not how I feel at all. Part of the emotion, I think one of the puzzles here is what causes Joseph's emotional breakdown. And one of them, I think, is his recognition that what Judah has said, as well as his own ongoing need to be reconciled with the family, I assume, that he sees now a path for rejoining the family, since Judah has been so concerned about the well-being of the father, who favors someone else than himself. Because the father just happens to be a person of flesh and blood. Come forward to me. And when they came forward, he said, I am your brother Joseph, he who you sold into Egypt. That's the raw fact. Now do not be distressed or reproach yourselves because you sold me hither. It was to save life that God sent me ahead of you. It is now 2 years that there has been famine in the land. There are still 5 years to come in which there shall be no yield. God sent me ahead of you to ensure your survival on earth and to save your lives in an extraordinary deliverance. Okay, so who wrote that line? Probably somebody who already had experienced or knew about the Exodus, which is retrojected back here. But let's take that out of the picture for the moment. There is an extraordinary deliverance that is at work here. Not the splitting of the Red Sea, but the healing of the family, and by anticipation, the possibility that the family writ large, the community, knows how to survive. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of all his household, and ruler over all of Egypt. So let's pause here and just ask, what are the elements of the reconciliation? What allows them to heal the wounds of sibling rivalry? Jim?
Well, to back up what Team did, I don't think it's just Judah's recognition of his father's feelings. I think it's the fact that he realizes he, along with his brothers, were responsible for this whole thing. And I would think that that's why he's willing to exchange his life for his brother.
It's a
In and of itself, acknowledging you're responsible for something.
Yeah.
Separate from everybody else.
Good, good. Isn't that part of what we might maybe overly glibly call it? Maturity and taking responsibility for your actions, and not necessarily seeing them as justified, but as something that was wrong and needs to be acknowledged.
And I don't think it says, but at this point, Judah may be a father himself.
Well, Judah is a father, because in chapter 38 he gives birth to children.
So then he may recognize additionally the situation. But I also find it quite interesting when Joseph says, "Is my father well?" Absolutely no mention of his mother. None.
Well, she died.
But does he know that?
Yeah, he knows that she died in chapter 34, I believe. Yeah. Tough chapter for Rachel. Yeah, Sue, what'd you say? She died at the birth of Benjamin, right? I think in chapter 34. Yeah, okay, responsibility. Sue?
Well, I was just wondering two things. One is a change in Joseph, a growth of humility.
Yeah.
Was he getting good at rationalizing using God?
Very, very good. So Joseph recognizes to use Malcolm's phrase, he's no longer an egocentric madman. He also recognizes what? The needs of the Father. Joe Judas convinced him of that. And what it means to be a brother. I can be tall. That's just about me. If I'm a brother, that means inherently I'm in a relationship. Father implies another individual. Short, stout does not. So that to say he's a brother is to recognize that he is a part. He's nested in the lives of other people. What else? What else?
Yeah, but he is already at that point achieved what he dreamt he would be. He's now a ruler, and he governs over his brothers, and he doesn't have to refer to dreams and this may come about and so on. And the brothers realize that. But I view this whole story as, if you take chronology out of the Torah, you have children shall honor their parents. This is what the parents' relationship should be to the children. And it's the father that's really brought this whole thing into being. And Benjamin really has a different relationship because he doesn't really predict that he's going to have power over anybody. He's just another son who the father seems to dote on, but he doesn't taunt the other brothers at all.
Who doesn't taunt the brothers? Benjamin, yeah.
I don't think Benjamin taunts the other brothers. He's kind of brought along, and the brothers are kind of taking care of him.
Right. This story could be an anticipation of honor your father and mother. This tells us how to do it, or what the circumstances are likely to be. Your parents are limited, flawed individuals. Nevertheless, they need to be honored. And notice that there are two elements of transcendence here. One is, the brothers are not on their own here. They're the sons of one father. And to the degree that they jointly honor that father, to that degree they are more whole. The trick is to find some things in common. And one thing in common is that we all have the same father. And we mean to honor the father. Joseph immediately replies to Benjamin, "Is my father still well?" and so on. Also, here's where they bring God into the picture. Verse 5, "Do not be distressed or reproach yourselves because you sold me here. It was to save life that God sent me ahead of you." So maybe this is God's story. Maybe God is one of the engines that generates this story. But also, I like this interpretation basically most of all. You've got to tell a story you've got to tell a story that is larger than any one of you. We are all in the same story. How do we know this? Because we're positing one God whose story this is. But it's basically not God's story. It's our story with God in it. In other words, one of the ways of transcending civil rivalry is to appeal to something beyond the brothers. A parent who, in spite of his or her flaws, needs to be honored by all of us jointly. And that we're in a larger story together. This is not Joseph's story. This isn't Judah's story or Benjamin or Reuben. This is our story. So our commonality is because we have the same parents, for all the problems that's going to generate. And if you're just trying to heal it on its own terms, it's not going to be enough. You need to honor that parent. You can't contrive an explanation for why something went wrong in the family. And also, I think this is an amazing point, really, because I often call this the author of the Torah's dare. The dare is, there is a God in the world, and that this God creates a story for us in which we together participate. It's the pronoun, the fundamental pronoun is not my. The fundamental program is our. And it gets to be our in one of two ways. We decide together that this is our story. Lots of luck with that. But if it's the story we are born into, and the story itself happens to have an actor known as God in the story, because if it's a story that includes all of us, it's got to have some major elements to it. I have to work on that last sentence. Aviva Zornberg, who has this wonderful book on Genesis, calls what Joseph has done here a master narrative. A therapeutic narrative. This is a narrative. Look, does Joseph believe the story is true? I don't know. But I could imagine that he doesn't. But he recognizes the practical value, the profound practical value of assuming that the story is true. Because it heals relationships by placing people on the same level and making them recognize that they're implicated in each other's lives. So, two elements of the healing. I mean, there are several things. Joseph's humility, Judah's care for the father, the tears, the huge emotions. And let's just look at the very, very end of the story, because we're getting close to being out of time. So, chapter 50, starting in verse 15. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph still bears a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrong that we did to him?" I mean, they're following the logic of sibling rivalry. Grudges happen. How do we know that Joseph has been healed of his grudge? So they sent this message to Joseph. "Before his death, your father left this instruction. So shall you say to Joseph, 'Forgive, I urge you, the offense and guilt of your brothers who treated you so harshly. Therefore, please forgive the offense of the servants of the God of your father.'" Now, we know, I don't know if Joseph knows, that this is a made-up story. Because Jacob did not know, doesn't know the true story. At least this saga doesn't indicate that Jacob knows. So this, in a way, reveals the desperation of the brothers for either to be absolved or to heal the family. I don't know what. And Joseph was in tears as they spoke. Why? Why? He feels for them. I don't know that this is true. He feels for them because they're fabricating something, because they want very much for some healing or wholeness, if only for themselves. His brothers went to him. I'm just positing that. I'm not saying that's the reason or the only reason or even the main reason. But it strikes me, Joseph's tears in this story are very, very powerful as invoking emotions as deep positively as they were evoked negatively at the beginning of the story. His brothers went to him themselves, flung themselves before him. Another moment when the dreams come true. You will bow down to me. And what does Joseph make of this? and said, "We are prepared to be your slaves." But Joseph said to them, "Have no fear. Am I a substitute for God? You don't need to bow down to me." Why? "Besides, although you intended me harm, God intended it for good, so as to bring about the present result, the survival of many people." Here's what Joseph, in my view, comes to see: the true meaning of his dreams. Yes, you'll bow down to me, but that's not because I'm so great, but because I have a role to play. And the role is the survival of many people. And so Joseph comes to see a new meaning of his dreams. "And so fear not, I will sustain you and your children." Well, "I will sustain you" reminds me of what happened at the very beginning of the Torah. When Cain, having killed Abel, says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And Cain's answer to that question is, "No, I'm not." And this no weaves itself through all of these episodes of sibling rivalry. But here, Joseph is acknowledging, "Yes, I am my brother's keeper. I will sustain you." So that this is another moment of reconciliation and solving the problem of alienation between siblings who have every reason, perhaps some more than others, of not feeling responsible for their siblings. That's one of the themes of the entire Genesis story. And unless siblings care about one another and are willing to sustain one another, when they get to be members of a community and citizens, what chance does a community have to thrive and survive, especially in adverse circumstances, which if we turn the page and come to Exodus chapter 1, we'll see they enter right away. "I am my brother's keeper. I am a citizen among other citizens, and we need to care about one another and to be our keeper." It strikes me as unmistakably, at least to me, an echo of what Cain says. "I will sustain you and your children." Thus he reassured them, speaking kindly to them. So it seems to me that not only do we have a reconciliation of the brothers, we've uncovered the factors which make that possible all the way through this story. I mean, it is a masterpiece not only of narrative telling, but of trying to get to the underlying elements which make the story work on the first level of alienation and then to work on the level of reconciliation. Amy?
Yes, I would like to go back to.
Can you take your mask down, please?
To conclude what I'm interpreting what you're saying, line 11 in chapter 37, I found it very interesting. The closing part was, "And his father kept the matter in
Oh, yeah, back, yeah.
And I think this is a case of everyone keeping the matter in mind, and how you interpret what you keep in mind
There you go.
will dictate how then the story unfolds.
I think that's a great point. Yeah, I've always felt that too, that this is a dramatic moment, that there is something to be kept. Let's follow this story. Let's keep the matter in mind ourselves. Yeah, there the author is kind of lifting himself out of the particulars of that moment for the portent of what's at stake here. I like that very much. Okay, Scott?
Do you have time for one comment? Okay, because I want to champion one of the unsung heroes here and maybe tear down one that's a little bit sung.
Yeah.
But I have a question first, and that's about Maimonides' contrition, perfect contrition. is action what defines perfect, or is it action and motivation, or just action?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure how to answer that, actually. It's certainly action. It's certainly actions. When you have the opportunity to do the crime again, don't do it.
Okay.
I don't know that yeah, go ahead.
Well, so earlier in the story, Judah, of course at the end, yes, he acts heroically, he acts with empathy, for the well-being of his father and everything else, but earlier, he also acts. He's the guy who keeps him from being killed in the first place. He said, now let's throw him in a pit, and then we'll sell him. So it's not his intentions there, he was saving his brother's life, but he wasn't necessarily, let's bring him home. Whereas Reuben actually came back and would plan to take him out of the pit, couldn't, too little too late, but his intentions are not clear. Was it to spare his father the grief? Was it to save his own hide, for killing his brother, basically? Or was it out of, compassion for his brother, Joseph?
But whatever Reuben's motivation was, we know what he wanted to do. We may not know why. He wanted to return Joseph to his father. And I think you're raising a very, very good point. In a certain way, Reuben is the larger hero of chapter 37, who is abandoned by the author.
He had a lousy settlement there at the end, too, when Jacob passes out the blessings and the quote-unquote blessing.
All right, chapter 49. I know the reason for this. The author has to celebrate Judah because he knows that King David is coming from Judah. I mean, I'm being a little facetious. But Judah's a big hero, obviously, in the fuller story. So not only does David come from Judah, but so does the Messiah. So I think Judah needs to be put front and center. It's arbitrary. But I think you raise the crack, so on, which needs that kind of an answer. Or the answer is, it doesn't matter. I mean, Judah just happens to be the guy. But Reuben is pushed aside for some strange reason, because he's got the solution right away. Maybe that's the problem. The solution wouldn't allow the story to unfold, which yields all of these reconciliation elements.
He had a little chance at the end also to just do an I told you so.
Oh, yes.
This was not a good idea.
Very good. Okay, so, I mean, if you're going along with this sort of thinking, the book of Genesis has now prepared the people for survival in Egypt, how to be a community. And part of it is an appeal to something that transcends the circle of the brothers, the parents and God. And that's what we get in the book of Exodus, don't we? We get law, we get God leading the people through, we get them singing together.